Okay. So before we get started, we're just going to give you a little bit of a background on who we are, besides the University of North Carolina, Charlotte. So I'm emceeing, so I'll start. I'm Lynn Wall. I am our Director of Course Production. So I lead our team of instructional designers that develop and build online and blended classes for our School of Professional Studies here at UNC Charlotte. And before I was a director, as an instructional designer, before I was an instructional designer, I was actually a full-time instructor at a community college in North Idaho, where I taught English composition. So English 101, English 102, technical writing, intro to lit. And I was one of the first faculty at that college to teach online and then also to teach online synchronous. And I have about 6 years of experience teaching the summer term at that institution, which was an 8-week term. So I taught three English 102 courses every summer for about 6 years. The money was amazing. The workload was a lot. So I have a lot of experience from that, in addition to the experience I have as an instructional designer and then our director of course production here. So it's wonderful to meet you. And so I will kick it over to Blair.
Hi, everybody. So thanks everybody for joining. I'm Dr. Blair Stamper. I am an instructional designer on the team. I've been an instructional designer for about 7.5 years. And prior to that, I was a middle school math and science teacher. I'm also an adjunct professor that teaches theories of learning fully online, as well as learning design online. And then I'll kick it to Chris.
Hi there, I'm Chris Mullenbach. I'm an instructional designer for the team, and I was an elementary school teacher for 10 years before I jumped into instructional design. So I know a little bit about being told to teach something in a shorter period of time than you think that you have, and dealing with the ups and downs of that. Go ahead, Corey.
Hi, thanks for being here. My name is Corey Troskler. I'm an instructional media designer on the team. And my background is also in public school education, specifically middle school and science and computer science. And I help faculty utilize media to kind of solve problems here. Garvey?
My name is Garvey Pike. I'm the executive director of the Center for Teaching and Learning, and I was really grateful that Dale reached out to us about this because, we understand what you're going through, and we'd love to help. And I'll say more about that later. I grew up in Indiana, right near Kentucky. Kentucky's a good state too. So glad to be talking with you all today. And I'll have more to say later, but I'll turn it over to my colleague, Kiran.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for inviting our team here today. My name is Kiran Budrani. I am the Director of Personalized and Adaptive Learning at our Center for Teaching and Learning. In my background, I've been in the field 15 years or so in instructional design and technology and as a faculty. Currently, I lead a team that works with faculty on strategic projects for our campus on faculty development, active learning, and adaptive learning. Prior to my role as director, I was also an instructional designer like everyone else on this team. And prior to that, I was a faculty of instructional systems technology back in the Philippines, where I grew up and I was born. And I've taught in online, blended, hybrid, face-to-face, all types of modalities. And I'm happy to be here with everyone to share some of our experience.
Okay, thank you, everybody. So the way that we were planning on running today is we have Dale generously shared with us the survey results of experiences after having launched your part of term initiative. And so we have seen anonymously the big areas of concern and problems. Rest assured, we encounter those every day. I had a meeting today with one of our programs, and they expressed exactly the same sort of concerns. So we've sort of structured this panel to address those big topics. And then we welcome questions as we go. So you can put those in the chat, or you should have control of your mics. And so if you have a moment of downtime, you can jump in and ask that question on your mic. That you are more than welcome. So just to give you a little bit more context of sort of where we are coming from in our journey around part of term, I'll hand it over to Garvey to share our background a little bit at UNC Charlotte of how we got started with this and where we're at right now.
Thanks, Lynn. At Charlotte, we started 4 years, almost 5 years ago, doing part of term courses to address student needs initially for graduation. That was the original impetus behind it. And of course, we had read and looked at all the same research that you all had that's out there. There's a big body of research about how this can be effective for students in all the ways. But what we found, and the initial reason was that what was happening was we had students who would get to graduation checkout in the spring semester of their senior year and realize that they were a course short of graduating. And so we thought, well, okay, the quickest way to solve this is what if we had courses that were 8 weeks that began in March to address that need. And so that's kind of an interesting, small yet strategic need of how we started. And this was, but what we realized is that there's more and more and bigger needs for this. We started on a voluntary basis where faculty would choose to teach this way. And we're up to several hundred courses per semester now. And what I've noticed between our implementation and your implementation, obviously there are differences. I think what you've done with your broad and strategic adoption of this is super commendable. I think this is amazing. And I have to congratulate your leadership and all of you sort of rallying around this kind of teaching model, because like I said, and you've seen the research on it of how it's so much better. The summer term that we teach has always been, a so-called short course. So this is really an expansion of that kind of model. It's ideally suited to working professionals and for all students, people who are upskilling and reskilling and having the kinds of student experiences that they have at your institution. The bigger trend in higher ed now is towards micro-credentials and certificates. And these are the kinds of ways that higher ed can better serve student needs. So having these short courses, so-called short courses or 8-week part of term courses is on trend, and it's really important and it's better for student learning. But I will acknowledge, and I would be remiss if I didn't, is that it does take intentionality to redesign and to teach courses this way for maximum benefit. You all have been teaching for, some of you for 1, 2, 20, 30 years, right? And so there's this feeling of a sunk cost that, I developed my course one way, and now I have to sort of, what do I need to do? Do I need to smash it together and do twice as much every week? Or do I have to put in the redesign work? And it really does take a different kind of focus. And so I understand that. And I appreciate that your senior leadership has asked us to come and sort of encourage and to provide a toolkit for you today of takeaways that you can sort of apply to your situation. And as a good friend of mine here at our camp says, like, if the answers were easy, we would have done it already. So I want to acknowledge that, right? Is that we know that this is hard work, that this takes the thought work, the design work, and sort of the dedication. And the fact that you are all here, I really want to thank you for even just being here today. To sort of, partner with us, collaborate with us, and be part of this movement forward. So seriously, I can't say enough good things about what you all are doing at your institution.
Thank you, Garvey. So we're going to jump right in. And one of the first big trends that we see when we discuss part of term or implementing part of term as a modality is the planning piece, right? And so this has to do with the content, the smashing of the content, the balancing of the workload, both students and faculty. So I want to open this up to the panel of what strategies and suggestions and tips or observations do you have to share with our audience around the planning of part-term courses?
I can start. And Lynn, do you mind if I share my screen really quick as well? So first, I do want to say it's a huge mindset shift to go from thinking in a 16-week format to an 8-week format. And something that automatically comes to mind when we do that shift is this thought of we're eliminating content or we're getting rid of content. And I think it's important to start thinking about it instead as we're focusing more on those key points that students need to know by the end of that course, rather than thinking about it as we're just eliminating things instead. So something that we do personally at UNC Charlotte is we do have a course planning map, and I'm going to share that just to kind of course, it might look a little overwhelming at first, but I just kind of want to share a little bit of our thought process as to when we're actually designing these courses. So as you can see, one of the first things we really think about is just the course goals or the course objectives. So what is it that the students really need to truly know by the end of that course? Then it's kind of important to really look at the content that you already have and analyze it. Take some time to which readings, videos, activities, assessments directly relate to those course objectives. Everybody, no, even me as an instructor, I'm always wanting to add more. There's new research that comes out, there's new things that come out. And oftentimes what I'll do is I'll put that as a supplemental material or optional material for those students that are really interested in that specific topic. And that allows me to still incorporate everything into the course, but the main things that students really need to take away are still there. Once you analyze all of those pieces, and I'm going to show you an example of a course that I am actually working on right now with a faculty member. So you can see it's a bit of a work in progress, where we have written the specific course objectives and the specific module or pieces of that, of that section of the course, I guess you could say. And as you can see, they still have a ton of different pieces. But they've kind of narrowed it down to these are the most important pieces of that course, as well as created specific agendas for students for their synchronous sessions. So this class still has synchronous pieces, and it still has the ability for students and faculty to get together on a weekly basis, but they have an agenda ready to go that are based on discussions, preparing for assignments, breakout rooms, that type of thing. I'll stop sharing.
Yeah, what Blair was saying is right on. We're not telling you to get rid of content. We know that any teacher knows that curating content over a period of time, you're trying to find those best resources. We're trying to find ways to maximize the value of your teaching, of your expertise, to curate that and to choose activities that hit those the most. To make something that's kind of a takeaway so that it's easy to break down or easier to break down. I've created a little bit of a framework for how to take your 16-week course, how to break that down so that you can start that process. Because that's the hardest part, is getting over the hump of cognitively, I need to, fit what seems to be the same amount of content into a shorter period of time. We know for student experience, as well as for efficacy of you as a teacher, that sharing, that putting the same amount of content doesn't make your life easier. And it doesn't make the students' lives easier, it makes it less successful. So looking at how we maximize that. So the very first thing with your course is taking a look at what actions or outputs you want the students to do in order to be successful with your course that demonstrates that they know how to do it, especially in the real world. So trying to make a real world application of it. What assignments will match the above? So once you have that, here's my end goal, what assignments match that they can do to demonstrate that they know how to do this. Not so much the tests, not so much quizzes. Those show that they can identify, that they can regurgitate, a little bit of explain, but not so much how they apply and that they're good at what you've taught them to do. Moving on to what is the knowledge or lesser skills that are needed to complete the above. So you're almost reverse engineering your course here. You're taking a look at what are the main components, and then you're adding meat as you go. And then once you've got what those lesser skills are, what content do you already have? You don't have to reinvent the wheel. This is where you use those resources that you have already and you pick from them. So use them as a resource pool rather than trying to make sure every single piece gets in there, and rather than trying to throw away everything. So what content can you already use? What assignments can you already use that match those? And then you figure out what pieces are you missing that you can then spend time looking for things that are up to date, that are reflective of current practices. And once you have all of this laid out, then from there, you can scaffold and chunk based on either chronological need and how it goes in time, or based on the time required to complete each of those components. And I can show you an example of one of my courses that I've done this with, and I'm finishing up this semester. And so here's those questions. They're in blue right here. And so this is a social work course on leading family therapy sessions. And so it started off 16 weeks. Now it's 8 weeks. And in here are the main components that my faculty member said needed to be demonstrated. So I know it's gonna be hard to see. We can share this out afterwards, but demonstrate how to successfully lead a family therapy session. Apply understanding of different phases of family therapy and how to navigate them. Demonstrate the application general therapy skills. So these are big ticket items that seem pretty difficult to mimic in a course. And so that's part of the challenge for us, is to come up with an answer to that. And there's even components in there to highlight. From there, what assignments would match that? So leading a family therapy session would be great. Unfortunately, with COVID, with virtual constraints, with just privacy rules, they aren't able to do that. So our decision was to create a long-term application project where students submit recordings of themselves leading a simulated session by creating their own questions and breaking out those components that were mentioned above. From there, one content and smaller skills. So here's where you look at it and you're like, this would be much nicer in 16 weeks. But when we focus on how we present this information and how we scaffold and chunk it, then it makes it a lot easier to present in those 8 weeks and to hit it efficiently. So there's a lot of different general skills, a lot of different theories that they have to cover. The scaffolding of time over here kind of breaks down how we do that. But then here's the content that the professor already had. So we're looking at what do you already have that you can use already in this course. So the course text is for some of it, but we know that it takes a little bit more than a course text to teach. And so breaking out, what will be covered. This one has some synchronous sessions, but not every single week. So what parts will be covered in those synchronous sessions? And then what already does she have in place that we can use? So she has a couple assignments that we're already going to use to cover these. Then the other pieces, this is where when you've got all this content, don't throw it away, use it, but sometimes use it as supplemental, not forcing the students to do it. So when you think that something's a good resource, adding it on at the end as an optional for students who didn't understand the textbook or who didn't understand the other methodologies for how it's presented. And then here's what content we need to create. And so some of these are assignments, some of them are finding resources, and then finally how to break it down. So for example, we took all these theories, there's 9 of them. We made the decision to, instead of doing 1 per week, which we could have done even in an 8-week relatively, to do 2 per week and have them demonstrate with 1 in their project and have them demonstrate with the others by having a journal of them explaining the actual components. And so that turns into a course map like this. So this is a separate course map, similar to Blair's, has a lot of the same components, but it's laid out based on time, going from the left to the right, so that you can see how heavy each component is by looking at each of the weeks. So you can see their project here is color coded at the bottom with their different pieces where they lay out when they're submitting. They've also got a branching scenario that they're practicing. Their knowledge checks to cover the critical components, and these are only 5 questions each, but covering the critical components that if they were to move on without knowing, they would struggle with. So all of this doesn't look like that much when you break it down based on the core elements that students need to practice and apply versus when it was in the 16-week format where you've got a lot more time to fit things in, but there's also not as much, it's not as lean when it comes to how those resources are used. So there's still other resources and readings that they can use as supplementary, but they're not required. So it's distilled down to just the main focuses.
One of the things that I would like to add, from experience of teaching part of term and 8-week courses in particular, is that sometimes, we recognize that you get kind of trapped between the content that you have to deliver versus the assessments that you would like to focus on. So, for example, at my previous institution, the department had decided that they were going to do that. What we did in our English department was, for English 102, for example, there were 4 papers that had to be written each semester. It totaled a certain number of pages or words that were expected of students to create as part of the course. And of course, those courses were sequenced from English 101 to English 102 to technical writing. And so there wasn't a lot of room to change the assessments, right? So in a summer class, they still had to assign 4 papers, right? We started off with a rhetorical analysis, we moved on to an argument paper, and then a research paper, and then a reflective paper. And so you can just do the math, 25 students times 3 courses times 4 papers that are 4, 7, or 4, 7, 10, and 4 pages. That is a lot of grading and feedback and writing on the students. So one of the things I knew I couldn't change that, right? So that was the constraint that I couldn't change. That we had to have those papers. They had to be on those concepts. So what I did do is I asked the students to choose one topic at the beginning of the semester, at the beginning of that 8-week term, and write every one of their papers on that topic. So all of the research that they do for the argument paper can be reused right away for the research paper. The frame and the shift of the goal of each of those essays could be shifted into fulfilling the goals and objectives of that next paper assignment. And so what that did was, one, it allowed me, it was much faster for me to get into their writing and providing feedback because I knew what their topic was. I knew their specific angle on what they were going for in their papers. And it also lightened the students' cognitive load. They didn't spend, Garvey made a joke earlier today that he's got a college student in his house, and the longest part of writing a paper for his daughter is choosing the topic. And so we removed the week of wallowing and indecision, and then choosing a topic and wandering down that path and doing that research, which in a 16-week semester is part of it, right? Like, I think we all love, we're speaking to an audience here is very similar to all of us. So we all love that exploration phase of finding that in 8 weeks, there's no time for that, right? We have to be more efficient. So that one change of asking my students to choose a topic at the beginning of the semester and focus on that the rest of the 8 weeks made a huge difference in the student load. So those are little things, and that's very specific to composition. I know that there's faculty here from other areas as well, but that's my original expertise as an instructor. So just those little things, if you can find them, can make a huge difference in the planning of your shorter courses. So to open up to anyone else on the panel, Karen? Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to add. So among all the things that you've heard today with planning, so we've heard about the use of objectives. We've looked at really focusing on what students need to know and need to be able to do, and then really looking at ways to document this through a course map. And so planning is super important, and it's very different to plan using a map of activities versus already having something in your syllabus. Your syllabus may document a list of topics, the bigger picture of the course, the description and all of that, but it does not necessarily communicate to students what each session or class time would require. It also doesn't necessarily communicate to you how much time you would spend doing different activities. So course mapping cannot be underestimated. It's a very important activity. And one of the things that I emphasize when it comes to course mapping is to really capture the amount of time it takes for you to run each class session or each week or each module, depending on how your course is distributed, right? And so I also encourage the idea of anticipate hidden time, the time it takes for students to not only access the material, but complete the work. For example, if you have students watch a video at home, if the video is 10 minutes long, it actually takes them 30 minutes to watch that. By the time they go into it, and then they stop, and then they go back, right? There is hidden time to the things that we need to do. So it's really important that when you start mapping activities, you add some buffers before and after so that you can really account for real time and not what you predict. From my experience working with faculty, we've done a lot of this visual kind of course mapping of time. We realized that what you think students take is really much less than what they actually take. It's almost double. And so if you account for that, then it will encourage you to maybe redesign or rethink how much work we allocate to students, and in turn, how much work we allocate to ourselves for grading and for feedback.
Another way to maximize that time so it's focused on education is in how you deliver that content. So making sure that it reduces the cognitive load, not to make college easier, not to make your courses easier, but to make the focus on the education, not on the navigation or the figuring out of instructions. So looking at how you're presenting current materials, and can they be presented in a more engaging way to get earlier buy-in, or can you present it in a way that scaffolds that knowledge for them so that it's already built into a way that they can build on it and then focus on application instead of focusing on reading or focusing on watching something for long periods of time.
And something to consider too that Lynn and Chris kind of alluded to in both talking about the map and the specific papers. I think sometimes we forget that rigor doesn't necessarily mean we need to incorporate more readings, more activities, more assignments to ensure that students are actually learning. And instead, it's about making sure that the students are actually leaving with a bigger perspective, an open mind, and through different perspectives and different experiences. So I think some of the ways that you can do that is actually using like discussion forums, small group chats that lead to problem solving or critical thinking, student presentations where they can actually hear how they've internalized the content and then share that with others and be able to learn from each other from that. So there are alternative ways to be able to still have those moments of student interaction and also incorporating rigor without having to say, we're going to double the amount of content every single week.
I don't think many of you, I haven't heard of any faculty member or teacher yet that got into it for grading. So having your focus on them applying frees up the instructor to do more real-time teaching and more real-time help for the students, providing comments back to their discussion posts. So while it may seem tedious and a lot to respond to discussion posts, if you're not having to grade long papers and other components and go in and do the kind of monotonous work that isn't demonstrating that students know it, but that they can find it or regurgitate it. If you're working on just the application and you're able to provide your expertise in those areas, you can scaffold that, and just putting in small chunks in a discussion can help a whole host of people, not just the person who needed some redirection. And so doing this, when you create a course for 8 weeks that you've scaffolded correctly and that you have thought reflectively about your assignments, frees up your time a lot more to do what you hopefully enjoy, which is the teaching and the student experience and building that knowledge in somebody else, transferring your expertise. So being able to do that should take work off of your plate rather than adding to it. A lot of that, though, is at the beginning. You have to put in that work at the very front end, but then you get that back for years to come if you've done a good job with it and if you've really considered the pieces that you're putting in.
This is Dale. Just for the ECTC folks, if you're following along with the chat, you'll see that they are encouraging questions. So I know it's a larger group, and sometimes we hesitate to ask questions when we don't know the time and that type of thing. But the team is open for questions and the comments, and so anytime, just feel free to jump in.
Chris, I think that you had something else to add on the planning too around start materials. Is that the next piece of your, or did you already talk about them and I missed it?
With the start here content, is that what you're referring to?
Yeah. And there's actually a question in the chat right now about experience teaching developmental remedial courses in 8 weeks. And so that's actually a great transition into the sort of start materials in planning. So whoever would like to take that one.
Can I get a little bit more context around the developmental remedial courses?
And Beverly, if you want to type a little bit more context for your question in the chat, I can share with you that one of the strategies that we use at UNC Charlotte, it actually just came up in another meeting. I've had like 6 meetings today, so when I keep referencing meeting, I've been in a lot of meetings. In a conversation that we had for a bachelor's program this afternoon, the concept of students coming in needing a lot of remediation, and the remediation that UNC Charlotte students need might be different than the remediation that your students need, but underneath that, the need is still the same. And so one of the things that we've done in our course production team is we've developed this concept of the ramp-up module. And so what our ramp-up modules are, they can either be delivered via a program, so like at the beginning of a student's degree, It is offered either for a cost or for free through our LMS, and we enroll students in it. And they go through the content and assessments that they need in order to brush up on those necessary skills to be successful in a program. And then the lighter version of that is actually to incorporate ramp up modules inside of a course. And so it would be course specific remediation. So a great example of this is one of our computer science courses requires a lot of knowledge of calculus and very specific calculus skills. And so we were discussing, we haven't actually built it, but we discussed with the faculty what those particular calculus skills were and built that out and sort of plugged it into that ramp up module so that students can take it at the beginning of their course and sort of get caught up. There's been a lot of conversation about rules, about is it legal to enroll a student in a course early and expect them to complete content? Does it need to be in a separate course? But those are all administrative questions. Like those are all problems to be solved that can be solved. And then our goal with the ramp up module is simply to sort of meet the students where they're at. But Chris, it looks like there's more context in the chat if you want to.
Yeah, no, I understand what you mean now. For a lot of those courses, especially when we're considering that demographics have changed across learners that are coming into colleges and with higher ed being so competitive, trying to get enrollment, trying to get students to succeed, looking at how you present that material and not necessarily shirking, but kind of reframing our mind around how we present material is a main way with that. The return on investment for textbooks is pretty low now compared to how it used to be. And the lecture and have a learner receive is also pretty low. The attention span's not there, but more than the attention span, especially if they're online learners, they've got other things going on. And if you've ever had to sit through a presentation or watch a video for a training, you know that you're probably multitasking. So looking at how you present that material, putting it into short bites, that's one of the ways, but also framing assignments so that if a student doesn't succeed with that first part, there's additional materials. So that's the great part about going from 16 to 8 is that you have a host of materials that you probably aren't going to use every single one of. So using those as the scaffolding to catch those who didn't understand the original content, provide them those resources as the secondary, and then allow them to retry. Because our goal is proficiency. It's not necessarily to get grades. And so having them go through that allows them to demonstrate that they now know it, and then they can move on, or allows you to see where they're making more, having more struggles. So even with our developmental courses or those initial courses for students coming in to build those skills, while it may seem like a lot when you look at it overall, if you again break it down to those main components and then to micro skills, then you can have them work on those micro skills almost at pace and allow them to work through it with the general guideline for how they should build up to it. One of the other areas, talking about the ramp up, Lynn was talking about the ramp up module. When you've got a course that has a prerequisite to it, and that prerequisite content is really important to them being successful in the follow-up course, but you don't have the time to teach that content again to them, or even necessarily spend a lot of time reviewing because you now only have 8 weeks to present your content, that's where we'll put in like a ramp up module that they can review it. They can even sometimes take a pre-test to judge if they know it. And it's a self-check component, because if you're seeing that a lot of students are failing out of your course or are failing in the initial stages, really struggling because they aren't caught up with that content, and this allows them a chance to do that before the course even starts. So it's at the very beginning. It's part of the start here. If they aren't successful with it, then they need to spend time in those first 2-3 weeks working on that alongside of their other content, because what it's demonstrated is that they did not learn that content in the previous course, or there was enough of a gap between the two courses. So that allows you as the instructor to focus on your content without having to cover the content of another course. And using these across the department is a great way of making sure there's proficiency all the way through. And after a couple iterations, usually that helps refine the course before as well. When you see that each time they're missing this one chunk, it allows you to help that. So it's front loading it, but it's putting it on the student, because in the end, students are paying for these courses to be in here. They are hopefully there because they want to know the content, or because they want to use that content later on to be successful in a career. And so it is on the students a little bit to do that. It's not so much this, we want to curate that knowledge in the best way possible. and providing them the opportunities to learn. And so having more access to that is going to provide that for them.
And I love what you said, Chris, and I agree completely. It's almost like we could, in your example of what 090 and 101, like that's maybe, mentally that's one course or one body of knowledge that all students need to have. And some students come into that at where 101 starts, right? But if we think of it as one big body of like, here's all the competencies, skills, and knowledge that students need to be successful for this particular content, then right, we could reach back into 090 when we're in 101 for the students who need that ramp up or whatever else. So I would just say, like, think of it as one course, and then you're figuring out where a dividing line is, where one actually starts and one ends.
And one thing I want to point out too is I know we're like throwing a ton of ideas at you all at once, including saying, hey, go plan out your whole entire 8-week course right now, right? That's a lot. And I think it's important to just think about it as like one little chunk at a time. So anytime you're teaching, every single semester, you continue, updating your course with new materials. You can change based on what your students' feedback is. And so if you think about setting up your 8-week course in that way, where one semester I'm going to try front loading this one module at a time. And then as the semesters go on, it'll start getting easier because you're going to continue doing that as you continue kind of working on that course and making sure that it's going well, basically. So I just want to say, like, sometimes it can be very overwhelming as we're just kind of throwing all of this at you, but just know that if you do this in small chunks at a time, it can definitely feel a little bit easier and a little bit better to handle.
There was a question in the chat about dealing with emergencies and delays, snow days, student illnesses, and all of that. We're going to talk about strategies for facilitating online synchronous sessions next, based off of I think that is a modality that your college has been implementing. So we'll address some of those. There's also some answers in the chat to the questions there. And then Katrina, there's a question here as well, the face-to-face public speaking class. I think we'll come back to that one. I think the pacing of having to trying to understand your question here. You're having to start one speech assignment, right, and then overlap that with the next one on the list. And Yeah, go ahead, Gordon.
Yeah, I think you found a great strategy there. Is that you said, so the idea is that if there's no way anyone wants to sit there 24 speeches in a row. I get it. You don't want to do that as the instructor. Your students definitely don't want to do it. So what you found is you've done like 12 and 12, and then you can still do some other content. That's great. I would say in any given class period or, the meeting time, that ideally we would probably be doing at least 3 different things in any time together. And some of that could be a micro lecture, some could be the discussion, some could be a small group breakout, right? So that the fact that you're mixing up and you've sort of intuitively understood that doing the same thing for the entire meeting time is not tenable, you're on the right track. That research supports that and the way that students' brains work and our attention spans, and you get it from I'm sure from yourself as an instructor. So you found something good there.
I was going to add exactly, Blair and I are thinking the same thing. You might also rethink the presentation of speeches to be online or in other formats, maybe in group formats, exactly what Blair has mentioned, recording speeches and posting them. Then you could get feedback from not just 1 or 2 persons in the class. Students can spend time reviewing each other's work, almost peer reviewing each other. It's a different strategy, but also a different goal, where you're not just assessing a student demonstrate that speech skill, but allowing for opportunities for feedback and improvement across each other in the class.
And while we do want public speaking students to be able to speak in front of groups, what we found in the last 2-3 years clearly is that speaking online is a 21st century competency that everyone needs to have.
Another thing that I've utilized for some of those where we're replacing a face-to-face for an online environment, and so this works for synchronous face-to-face courses to utilize that online environment as well, is having a self-assessment for students. So the course that I demonstrated earlier, where they're submitting those video sessions of them leading a small group therapy, a simulated small group therapy, before they submit that, they're taking a short quiz that is basically the rubric, and it's them checking off that they have done the main competencies so that the focus of the instructor, granted, the instructor will check those things as they go through, but the student knows what it takes to get 100 on it. And from the teacher side, it allows them to focus on just remediating when they see an issue with how they're framing their mindset in that group therapy session, when they're not showing some of the skills and techniques. So they can open up for that rather than focusing on the just the navigation of those online tools, but utilizing their peers in class as well. So you may record it online, but you watch it in class. People bring their headphones, they watch each other's, they're able to build off of that. But setting up those assignments so that they scaffold and culminate in one larger one allows you to use the larger assignment and spend time actually doing those in class, but letting the smaller ones build each chunk of what the skills that they're practicing until they get to that point. That way, even though there's multiple assignments, maybe the first couple are built in small chunks where they're just working on that one skill in little pieces, and then they put them all together for a final, for example, presentation here. And Barry, yours reminds me of elementary school. Everything was constantly running amok, fire alarms, drills, all sorts of stuff. So, all teachers, instructors are adapting. Part of that is, and I know I saw somebody put in the chat, doing a little bit of flipped learning can also help. That way, any time that you have is focused on the discussion and the reflection and the actual building of knowledge off of each other, rather than the listening or passive modes of integration with content, so that they're getting the value of an instructor where they're building off of their understanding of it.
There is another question in the chat. I do want to get to some of the online facilitation strategies for synchronous course meetings, but I am going to make sure that I copy and paste this so that we return to it at the end, because this concept of classes that are already very heavy in the 16-week term, and both cognitively and then needing to be pared down even more, I think is a really important topic that we should address a little bit more. So we're going to come back to that one. But for managing and facilitating synchronous online course meetings, as I'm sure you all are aware from COVID, teaching synchronously online is not the same as teaching face-to-face in a classroom. Right? So there are a lot of things that are happening in an online meeting. And just for an example today, right, like I started my screen share, my presentation was on the wrong screen. And because it was on the wrong screen, it ended up eating my Google Chrome. And so then in order to open that, and in my notes, I had to open it and then show everyone everything that was on my screen. Otherwise, I had to stop sharing. And so there's all sorts of little details around that. And I'm thousands of Zoom meetings in, and those things still happen to me. And so one of the things that I very strongly encourage, and this is all going to be included in the resources that we'll send later, is recognizing that no plan for synchronous learning survives contact with students. And it just doesn't work, right? Things go wrong. And so when you have delays and you have things like weather delays and you have technology problems, it takes down an entire course. I think the answer to that is like, it just happens, right? And you just sort of move on, and whatever content you had that day that you needed to give to your students, you send it to them in an alternative format instead of the hour long that you had with them synchronously. You spend 20 minutes typing up an announcement in Canvas or Blackboard in an email to send out to your students. But the trick with the synchronous sessions and the strategy that we use here at UNC Charlotte when we're developing these courses with our faculty is we ask our faculty to design their synchronous online courses with the same level of intentionality and planning ahead of time as they do for their purely online courses. So that means that every session that they have with students, and hopefully it's not, sometimes it is multiple times a week, that's pretty rough development. But we ask those sessions to be scheduled. So if the session is going to be an hour and 15 minutes, or it's going to be 3 hours long, we ask that they prepare an agenda in advance that they share with their students. And depending on the level of complexity of the design, perhaps a lot of what is identified in those synchronous agendas needs to also be mapped to objectives. And I think that that's something that doesn't oftentimes get done in our face-to-face courses. As Kiran mentioned, the importance of course mapping and what it does for us in our planning is really important. And the same is true in a synchronous course as well. It's not just, I'm going to do what I do in the classroom online. It's actually really different. And one of the benefits of planning out and providing agendas for your synchronous sessions is it helps you to identify the balance of what you're asking for in a synchronous session. So if you have 3 hours, one of the survey results that we saw was being able to keep students' attention in longer classes. And this may have been in face-to-face courses that those comments came in, but if it's in synchronous online, then it's even worse in synchronous online. They're not just sitting in the classroom, they're watching a computer screen. It's very easy for any of you right now to open another tab, respond to an email, answer a chat message, scroll through Facebook. When I was teaching synchronously online, I actually, inside joke, it was for a dual enrollment class that was in Southern Idaho. So it was 6-hour drives away, and they were all in high school, and they were all in the same computer lab. I do not know why they were all in the same computer lab taking this course. And apparently there was an unspoken rule that if you didn't want to contribute that day, you'd sign into a computer sitting next to your friend, and they would fake chat for you throughout the session so that I did not realize that that person was not in class. And then that person was running around the high school, hanging out, doing stuff. And there was no one in that room to say that that person was there or not, except for they had signed into their online session. And there wasn't enough bandwidth out of that room to run webcams at that time because they put 25 students into one classroom in a high school in Southern Idaho. And so, just, man, I'm like kicking myself on that still, even now. I'm like, gosh, how did I not realize that was happening? To such a point that I forgot what I was trying to say. So the point there is that it was very easy for the students to do that if I was just talking. It was much harder for them to manage that if we were doing group work, because I would be jumping into their shared Google documents and I would be like, where is so-and-so at? Like, I don't see her in this document at all. And so then there would be this like pause and moment. And then all of a sudden they would appear and I'd be like, oh, okay, they must have just been having technology problems. But no, someone texted them to say the instructor's looking for you, get back into the classroom. So shared and collaborative programs like Google Documents, shared brainstorming tools. If you all have heard or haven't heard of it, Miro is a online brainstorming tool that's free for educators right now. It's really great. I'm converted to it. I love it. It's free for educators, so it's amazing. And I'll put that in the name of it in the chat so you can Google that. But those sort of tools will make your synchronous sessions more interactive and engaging, and it will help keep your students focused. And my suggestion on that is you plan, right? So you plan sharing of content, and then you break it up with an activity that is students work on their own. Then you come back and you share with the full group, share a little bit more content, provide some feedback, and then send students off to work collaboratively together on a Google document. I tried to avoid breakout rooms. They're a little bit hard to manage sometimes. And I found that anytime as an instructor that I popped into the breakout rooms to see how things were doing, the only thing that happened is everyone stopped talking. That may be different for professionals, but for students, as soon as the instructor shows up, it's the same as in face-to-face where you walk by their table and everyone kind of stops talking. When what you want them to do is to be asking questions. And so I found that working a little bit more collaboratively in documents, like whiteboards and Google Documents was a little bit easier. They would chat their questions to me when they saw me pop up in their document, or they just typed above where they were chatting, does anybody have any questions? So those are all some strategies, just being very intentional with your synchronous sessions, just as you would be with your face-to-face sessions, and then breaking that information up of not just lecturing, but lecturing, engagement, all the pieces around active learning that we use in our classrooms in order to keep students' attention. So I don't throw it to Chris and Blair if they have anything else to add. They've done a lot of development of some of these in our course production process as well.
Lynn kind of spoke to a lot of the things I was going to say. I think the most important thing is setting those agendas ahead of time. not only for yourself to help with pacing, but also to help with the students to recognize what they need to have done before coming to your specific course. So a lot of times in our courses, students might be reading something or watching a video or doing something ahead of time. And so we put that out there very specifically to say, make sure you've read this, make sure you've watched this. We're going to discuss this in these specific ways. So setting agenda is something that I definitely try to encourage as much as possible. As well as I think Miro is one of those, I don't know if it's newer, but it's newer to us. And it is a very cool tool because not only do you get to see the brainstorming happening, but you get to see all these little cursors moving around at the same time. And it's almost like a hive of knowledge, like just kind of floating around. And it's a very cool tool, very engaging for students as well.
Yeah, using that shared time when it's synchronous, whether that be in class or synchronous online, to build off of reflections and to consider the learning opportunities that you've already had, that the students have already had, so you can provide a framework around what they're bringing to class that can allow you to maximize that time so that it's cultivating knowledge. And having that, as you said, in a plan, knowing that it may not go exactly to plan, especially when you leave it more open-ended like that, but having those points, those key struggles that students have struggled with in the past. So using your previous course to identify, all right, they struggled with this when it was 16 weeks. Now that it's 8 weeks, they're possibly going to struggle more. So let me spend more in-class time focusing on this piece and use the out-of-class time for the less difficult, but also the pieces to flip that learning so that they can work on those outside of class where they won't struggle, bring it to class, or have that positive struggle. You know, there's struggling with navigating would be a negative one, but struggling with content that they need to learn or application that's difficult in the real world is a positive struggle. So let them struggle with that, bring it to class, and then help correct and help facilitate. You know, that's what the textbook says, but in the real world, it doesn't work like that. This is how it works. So bringing that, again, maximizing your expertise in time is how you use those 8 weeks, and you use those synchronous sessions, whether that be in person or whether that be online, to get the biggest impact on students. You know, and also on you as well. Happy students leads to better course reviews, leads to better enrollment, leads to happier departments, leads to happier school. It all goes around, even if it's not immediate.
I would add another strategy that we have seen work with our STEM courses is the use of polls. So in a live class or even an online class, the challenge to get students to maintain attention and to maintain engagement is to get them to do things with you, right? But then our challenge is we have a large class. We have 100, 150 students, sometimes more. So in STEM courses, technical courses, there is a tendency to have a lot of time spent on explaining concepts, showing how things are solved or broken apart and synthesized back. And a lot of this needs understanding and time to process. And so polling technology like Poll Everywhere. If you are online, Facebook has polls, not Facebook, I meant to say Zoom has polls built in. There are also free polling technology like Slido available to get students to do things with you as you're going through concepts or breaking apart examples with them. One of the values of using quick polls in between your micro lectures or in between activities is to get a quick check or scan of how the students are doing in that moment. It's actually giving you live data as to our students understanding, our students getting the concept. Is this across the whole class or is it just half the class? So it actually gives you a sense. And I've seen our faculty change their teaching based on the result of a poll. So if the class is not performing well as they thought, they would redirect to another example or maybe review something that needs to be reviewed as a result. So I will emphasize the use of these quick check moments, especially in large classes. You use technology to help facilitate them through polling.
Sorry, I lost my unmute bar. See, technology problems. I just, one of the things I wanted to add here is that I haven't mentioned it before is it's really important that we use technology as efficiently and as meaningfully as we can to automate anything that we can, right? So anything that can be automated ahead of time, we should do that. And it's sometimes difficult to determine where your value most lies in being, just in time and adding feedback and that just in time feedback. But sometimes it's just not tenable, right? Like you just can't be there. And there are a lot of constraints that in higher ed, right? We have a lot of different classes, we have different sections, teaching overloads for whatever reason, right? Is it if people enjoy having that extra salary and they're teaching overloads, and that's by choice, but sometimes it's not by choice, right? So sometimes, after COVID and all of the changes and the Great Resignation and all of the retiring that has occurred in higher education, you just could have too many classes, right? And when that happens, you really do have to be very ruthless in how you utilize technology, right? To automate, self-checks, like Kieran was talking about with polls. If you can do it, something synchronous with them and get it over with and out of the way, should you do that? Or should that be asynchronous? If it's asynchronous, does that mean that it's adding this huge feedback load to you? Is there a way that you can have your technology do those things for you? And if that means that you don't have the tools that you need, sorry, Elizabethtown Community College administration here. If there are the tools are missing, right? Like polling software or sort of tools to do automated feedback through your LMS or something similar, those are the things that make the shortened courses easier and more bearable for your faculty and students. And so those technology pieces are really important for the initiative. Dale, do you want to does anybody want a break? It's an hour and a half. We probably wouldn't give you a break if you were students in an hour and a half class, but we're not. You aren't our students. So if anybody would like to step away, we could do a 5-minute break.
Sure, we can do that, and that would give people time to reflect a little bit on what's been said so far, and maybe come up with some other questions or thoughts or ideas. So it looks like it is 3:00 now. So we'll come back at 3:05 if that's okay with everyone. So step away for a moment. We'll be back at 3:05. Thank you. If anyone is interested, US is up 1-0 at halftime. I just checked in the World Cup soccer.
Appreciate the update. Thanks.
Same.
Well, maybe you didn't want to know. Maybe you want to watch it later. Sorry. I shouldn't have said
I'd rather be winning.
Okay. This is really good information. Dr. Pike and the rest of you all appreciate it very much. This is right on a task of what we were hoping to get from you guys. And so it's really good. Thank you again. And I don't know if you all know about the K. Patricia Cross Academy. Have you heard of? Yeah. She has a lot of videos with a lot of 3-minute tips if you watch those. Some of the same things you guys have been talking about as how to get engagement in the classroom or online, and so I've shared those with our faculty, and so it's just another more ideas of how to get engagement and maybe change our tactics a little bit.
Yeah, those are great. The minute paper, the muddiest points, like there's those really quick, easy, active techniques to engage students that was Angelo and Cross, right? Cross has put all that together. There's a lot out there, but those, I just heard someone talking about that today in a meeting. Sound like Lynn now, but someone mentioned that they're still doing minute papers. I was like, yeah, absolutely. They're great. They're great for so many things.
Yeah.
And you get tons of feedback that way. But no, thanks for asking us, Dale. And I really have to give credit to the team the team here are just amazing.
Yeah, they are. If y'all want to come to Kentucky, I could probably pay you maybe a salary of $3,000 a year or something, but
got an amazing team, and yeah, I'm grateful to work with them every day.
Yeah.
And Dale and the entire team, Dr. Pack and I had a chance to speak a little earlier this morning. And, if this is something that we feel is trending well and needs continued work, we can talk about maybe some future projects staying together.
That'd be great. We'd be happy to help. We all love what we do, and service is a big part of what we do. So we're really grateful that you asked us to collaborate with you on this.
How's the weather in Charlotte?
Pretty nice, like mid-60s today.
Wow.
It's sunny. How about there? Is it cold yet?
It's a little warmer, but it was sunny this morning. Now it's cloudy. So I think rain's coming and the temperatures will drop. So.
And I saw something that teased me on my Apple News. It was like the flash up of like impacts to the southeast for like winter or whatever. And then I like went to click on it and it disappeared. And I was like, what is this, fake news? Like, where did it go? I would like to know about this. And maybe maybe it's coming. It's a Kentucky right now.
Yeah. I think overall our weather is about the same as your all's, pretty much.
You probably get a few more dustings than we do in general, though.
Yeah. We don't have the occasional hurricane that comes on close to us, but we have the tornadoes that hit Kentucky quite often.
All right, it looks like we're past our break time. So to move us on to the last big area that we saw in the survey results is the facilitation strategies for part of term courses. So, that includes things, communication strategies and then feedback, right, and planning. And so the accelerated workload is not just for students, it's also for faculty. And so recognizing that, we wanted to speak a little bit to some of the things that we do with our own faculty in our course production process and in our consulting. So with that, I will hand it over to Chris, I think, or Blair, whoever would like to add.
It may end up sounding like a broken record, but having just purposeful strategies, purposeful points put in for how you use your communication and how you structure that learning content for students. So I've had courses that are mostly announcement based, or I've had courses where everything's inside of the assignments and it gets really lengthy. But even breaking up how you communicate in part of term courses can really help reduce the cognitive load for students and help them to not need the instructor to facilitate that conversation as much, where if you put it in on learning overviews or on learning guides, having a consistent process for how students go in each week can help take away from that communication that you're going to get from students that isn't growth mindset wise, where it's just focused on process based. So how do I do this? Or I didn't understand this component of it, talking about the instructions or the assignment. So if you think about those ahead of time, about the learning experience of somebody who is not a content expert, which is a little bit what we do as instructional designers, because a lot of times we're not experts in that content area. So when we see it, if we don't understand it, chances are the students aren't going to understand it either. So thinking about it from that, maybe even running it by somebody who is not a content expert, say, hey, would this make sense if you read this? Would you know what to do? That way you can go from the viewpoint of somebody who doesn't already know what the end product looks like, because for students, that's usually going to be the difficult part of it. And if you ease out some of that transition for them, then they're going to attach to the knowledge a lot better. And that's going to allow them to gain the knowledge quicker, which is going to allow them to do more in less time by setting those up in the correct way, or not having to have them go through you as the instructor as much to get started on things, but using you as the resource for building that knowledge instead.
Yeah, and I'll jump off of actually what Lynn just posted in the chat too. Once you've kind of taken the time to really map out your course, the course itself may not change. You might make small updates, that kind of thing, but it really allows you to spend the time during the semester on this facilitation piece. And so being able to automate things like administrative of reminders of due dates, reminders of class times, that kind of thing, You can then spend more time or even other automated is even preparing like common feedback that you often give for the same exact assignment, and then allows you to kind of copy and paste and then edit a little bit to be more personalized. But then that allows you to really focus on creating announcements or creating emails that summarize the learning that's happening and focus on areas that students are struggling with. Then you can then create additional videos or additional documents or readings to focus on those areas that students are struggling. And then you have that continued on for the next semester, and you already have that resource ready to go. So once that course is really developed and figured out, this facilitation piece gets a whole lot easier. And you can spend more time to be able to create that community of learning and between you and the students.
I'll add something. Len, if you don't mind, I can share my screen. So I'd like to share an idea for facilitation. And a lot of times when we think about facilitation, we want students to get engaged in the classroom and do a lot more talking. And we resort to the idea of discussions, right? So we have students, let's discuss the idea that we just learned. Let's discuss online this idea that we just read, right? So there's this concept of discussions that's very broadly used as a terminology. And one of the things Lynn and I have discussed for many years is, do students really know how to discuss, right? So facilitating learning requires them to be engaged with you in the conversation, and discussions need to matter and they need to be designed. And so for us to make discussions matter more, one idea is to use the concept of sentence starters when we engage students in a discussion. So on the screen, you'll see here different types of discussion. So we want to set the goal for the discussion. Do we want them to talk about the concept, which is number one? Do we want them to summarize something, which is number two? Do we want them to reflect and discuss? That's number three. Do we want them to, build on each other? That's curate knowledge. Number four, all the way down, different types of discussion by levels of complexity, up to a point where they're discussing their project, right? Or critiquing each other, or giving each other recommendations to improve something that's already being done. So there's so much they could work through, but knowing what the discussion focuses on and then giving them starters to engage in discussion so that the facilitation becomes intentional, becomes purposeful, right? And there's a goal to it. There's an outcome to it. And so we can share this as a handout perhaps with you, but having sentence starters to engage students in or facilitate discussion in groups or in pairs or in large classes is very important. It's just very much more guided than very open. I thought I'd just share this resource to everyone.
To build off of Kiran, making your discussions authentic and not making it a consistent every single week thing, unless there's a real reason for that, helps you to not have students waste their time doing that and just responding to two others without actually putting thought into it. So if you're teaching an online asynchronous course where they're doing that, thinking about what are they actually going to get out of building off of each other's knowledge. And if they're not going to be able to learn from each other because they're just identifying something, or they're doing a lower level Bloom's taxonomy strategy with any of the content that they're doing, then considering a different type of assignment to maximize that, or considering putting that as a piece to a later assignment and bring them up to spend more time looking into content, or extending their knowledge by looking into newer resources or finding materials that can help each other, instead of just posting their interpretation of something that they can't build off of each other.
We have about 15 minutes left, and I think we have some takeaways. Before we do that, we'll start with we'll just do a tiny little activity to give us a little bit of a reset. So Kiran, do you want to throw that out there? Right as you take a drink of water.
I didn't know you were going to switch. I guess, I think before we go into Q&A, we just want to get a sense of how you're doing right at the moment. And if you could take a minute to access your Zoom panel and give us a reaction as to how you're feeling at the moment, and post an emoji, like I just did, which is the crying, smiling emoji, which is all I had at the moment, please do so. We want to see how you're feeling and what you're thinking at the moment. Take a minute, find our emoji panel through the reactions tab in the bottom, and tell us how you're doing. Thumbs up, thumbs down, sad face, happy face, heart, or open to any. Just tell us how you're doing. And if you need to find more emojis, you can click the 3 dots and you have your entire library of emojis. Come on, we want everyone to tell us how they're feeling and what they're thinking right now through an emoji. Or you can post in the chat too, like the others are doing. I love that.
Asking for feedback across as you guys do these 8-week courses across multiple semesters. If you ask for feedback from students, they're going to help you, not always accurately, but usually pretty well, help you refine your course as well to where are those sticking points, and that'll allow you to focus on them kind of as you go. So asking them also provides a higher stake for them, and then they are more invested in the course because they feel like their opinions are mattering if you take them and take a look at them for future consideration.
So we've some other ways to collect feedback through this is what we call affect feedback, right? How students are thinking and feeling as they're going through their learning experience. In synchronous sessions like this, you could use emojis. If you were to do this in an online class, you could use reflection posts and have students write down how they're feeling or ask them to post an emoji online. And more advanced tools may have these built in, so you can just have them. Google Docs has them, spreadsheets have them. Almost every tool now can allow you to embed emojis. And so just giving value to what students are thinking, feeling, and can impact how they're performing and can give you some, feedback as to how you can plan your lesson accordingly. So we are open for questions, right, Lynn?
Yeah, I think our next slide, just to give you a little bit of a look under the hood. I don't actually know what the team was thinking about with the takeaways slide. That is the next slide in the presentation, but I will kind of share that. I'm not going to share the screen, but the next slide was takeaways. So, team, do you want to say anything about that? We are going to send Dale resources to send to all of you some more static resources. We have a web page that we provide our faculty. We'll provide some other links, the templates, some of the templates that you saw today as alternatives to what was shared in the chat already from someone at your own college. Just is the resources that we have, should you find them helpful. But takeaways, Claire, Chris, anybody want to explain what that slide was for?
This is a difficult process, but it's something that's worthwhile for sure. And especially with how busy you guys are, we know how the instructor teacher life is, how the higher ed life is. It is difficult, but in the end, taking that time ends up freeing up a lot of time in the back end. And while it may seem like an unmanageable amount of work, starting with those end goals, boiling it down, distilling it down to the most important things that students need to demonstrate, and then working backwards from there helps to make it more bite-sized and manageable.
I would, Blair, I saw you unmute. I would say this is not something that you need to do alone, right? A lot of work that we do in courses tends to be individual, and that's really challenging because it can get very heavy to consider all the elements. You're considering the technology, you're considering the textbook, you're considering the objectives, you're considering the students, all the factors that go into course design and effective facilitation. It's wonderful to form a community of faculty among your department or have a buddy, or reach out to organizations who are doing this, and create conversation more regularly, so that this doesn't become one time and it becomes natural for you to engage in conversing about learning and course design and improving how student experiences are. That's all of this that we shared today came from all of our shared experiences here. It's not just our individual work that we are doing.
Yeah, and I was just going to add basically everything what Chris and Kieran said, but all of us here have experiences with teaching as well as the instructional design side, and we work every single day with the faculty members, and we recognize how hard it is to not only build a class, but taking that class from 16 weeks to 8 weeks. And so we're hopefully this has kind of helped you to see that it's possible, and that, like Chris said, being able to kind of chunk the planning into smaller pieces and making it a bit more manageable to be able to be successful in this.
I would just add in that no problem that you have in your course is unsolvable. Everything has an alternate solution, from assessments to activities to how you generate content for students. So if you're like, I'm doing it this way and it's not working, don't give up. There's definitely a solution out there, and either hopefully we helped you with it here, or you can find a solution to that somewhere, or cue us maybe.
Well, and then also following up from the chat, sometimes the solution isn't at the course level. Sometimes the solution is actually at a program level, right? Of talking about, is a course appropriately credited, right? So is it listed as a 2-credit course when it should be a 3-credit, or is it a 3-credit when it actually should be 4, or maybe 3 credits with a lab? And then that would then help students to plan, and it would help determine load a little bit better, because if you're teaching a 4-credit class and 3 credits, yeah, that's going to be a lot. And we recognize the constraints with those things, right? We're elbows deep all the time in conversations about how do we solve around this course really should be 4 credits. And if it can't be 4 credits, what does that mean? We work with faculty a lot on those topics. And sometimes the answer does go, it needs to go up, and it needs to be solved at that level. So being strategic about identifying those things and trying solutions with what you have before going up to that other level is, I think, a super important thing. It's a good faith effort that you've done for your course and your students. And then if it really isn't working, then that's, you go to the next. I think that kind of leads into some of the questions, the question in the chat from Tiffany: how did college leadership make our transition to condensed courses this year? It wasn't around when we started that. Garvey, do you have any? I mean, I know that the CTL provided training and support and workshops for faculty around it, but anything else?
Yeah, and we still do, right? But I think I'll be completely honest, is that as more programs move towards this at a program level, like as new programs come online and they realize this is a better format, that is still hard for faculty. It's hard for everybody. So I want to acknowledge that this is hard work. Nobody said it isn't. And I think what we do is we just try to show the support, like your leadership's doing today, is bringing us in as a resource and trying to help you all.
We have about 7 minutes left. So if anybody has any questions, wants to come on the mic, you are welcome to do so. We will be here until 3:30.
I want to say as well that it sounds like you guys, administration, leadership, Dr. Pate, Dale, that they really already are trying to take those steps forward. Budgeting at different colleges is very different. We're kind of the resource at ours right now to help programs that come through our queue, but starting those conversations around it and trying to build the pedagogy side of it to help, and then trying to see, how to allocate resources and get help to, help with those more difficult ones is kind of the start to that. There's no one answer for how to make that transition at even a course level, but at a college level, especially, that's difficult. So just you guys being part of this is a major step towards that. And we appreciate you being here and being willing to talk and share your problems and your struggles and ideas as well with us.
Beth, you asked a question, what percentage? I have to work out the math on that, but it's much smaller than yours. I mean, you made a strategic decision at the leadership level to pretty much go all of your courses. I think that's a great decision, and I wish we would do the same here. But more and more programs, certainly all of our new programs that we're working with, are all really going towards this. It's just, a four-year university where we are is a particular kind of animal. And I understand every school culture is a little different. We have 7 colleges. and all the colleges within the university have a certain level of autonomy and decision making that happens through shared governance. So that's my fast answer.
Yeah, I agree with Garvey. Like when we do our intakes for our course developments, the ID is probably like, no, that's not right. But it feels to me that there are more 8-week courses than there are 16 now. And that's our online MBA, our master's in business is 8 weeks. Our social work programs are 8 weeks. I just put in the chat that our respiratory program is going to an 8-week model. A lot of our nursing courses are getting transformed into the 8-week term as a way to become more attractive to students. The time, it's just the timeline for their working professionals, their audience is the same. Their student demographic is likely similar as to what you have. And they're really trying to leverage that 8-week term to solve those challenges around enrollment and staffing, et cetera. And so they are partnering with course production, our team, to develop those classes as they go. And that's that thing of it's helpful not to do it alone, right? If you have someone else just to bounce ideas off of, even if they're not an instructional designer, it's a very valuable thing to be like, oh, that's not going to work, right? Like, or have you thought about this? Really important to share that with others.
I think I shared with you guys that we are in our second year of this transition, and it appears to be getting smoother. We are learning things as we go, as most organizations would, but the faculty here have really supported this idea, and Dr. Pate and the other leadership gave good evidence, good reason as to why this is the move that we wanted to take as a college. And we have a wonderful faculty here, and they are working as hard as they can to help students be successful. And, with that transition, there are different philosophies, different ideas, as you guys have run across many, many times. And so in 2 to 3 years, we'll get back with you and say how we did. Yeah. And the time is about out. I just wanted to say thank you so much again. This has been very helpful, and just for you all, as busy as you are, to give your time and energy and thought and preparation and ideas to us is really quite. I'm very, very appreciative of that, and I'm sure the rest of us here at the college is just as appreciative. So. Garvey, I'll be in touch with you, and we'll do some type of evaluation, and I'll try to get the results to you, and so you can get some feedback from us. And
we'll put our toolkit. Yeah, we'll put our toolkit together. We'll have a website for you, and we'll share that with you by the end of the week.
Okay, that sounds really great. So I guess our time is about out. There's a lot of thank yous coming across. So. All of you, thank you very, very much. And I should have turned my screen on. I'm sorry I did not. So thank you very much, all of you, every one of you. And so it's been great. We'll be in touch. Thanks you
so much.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Thank you, guys. Best of luck with your semester.
Thank you.